This is a big topic, talking about immigration, talking about the Dane Sanctuary Coalition and how we function and how we got together and how First United Methodist can be involved in that work. I want to hear from you all first. What brought you here? You could have gone home, you could have gone to brunch, you could have done a number of things. I understand there's a football game. What do I know? So what made you decide to stay an extra hour after church service and come and hear me talk I could talk forever about this. So rather than my talking forever, I want to hear first from you all. What brought you here? What is most of interest to you? What are the questions that you have?
Well, my family has an agricultural background from California. So this issue has always been, at the top of the family consciousness, because there's always a desperate need for laborers in California. Without them, they can't really, produce. But how do you handle that issue equitably, fairly, and sustainably?
Great, thank you.
I think I'm here because I see this as one of the great justice issues facing us today. And it's one that I've always felt almost powerless as an individual to influence or do anything about, no matter how I might want to. And so I think I'm here to find out I'm here to have you tell me that we're not really powerless, I guess, and how we can really help to sustain something that I think is so important to our country, a flow of immigrant input into our creative base and into our labor base, and also the humanitarian element of this. I know there are a lot of people out there just trying to flee some very, very bad situations around the world. And I've always held the poem by Emma Lazarus to be something quasi-official, a statement of policy, a statement of intent for our entire country. I know it didn't work out, didn't start out that way, but that's how in my ideal I'd like to see it evolve. So,
anybody else? The question for you who've come in is what brought you here today to speak? I mean, to listen to our speaker. As she said, you could have gone home. What brought you here? Anybody? Milton?
Immigration. I mean, the issues have gone on and on, but I've been, I think, piqued in interest since we're trying to understand what's happening in Fort McCoy and the other places where people are gathering these days. We see people on the move on television and hear about in the news, but I guess maybe I'm out to lunch, but I don't hear much about it locally. And I would like to know more about what's happening locally, what the needs are, what the hopes are. So that's where I am.
Is there anyone who is joining us online that would like to make a comment? Okay.
Great, thank you.
Just a second, we had Marjorie up here. I just want to hear what people have to say.
Immigrants have made this country. I mean, other than the original Native American people here, this is a nation of immigrants. And so, people can say how many generations back or whatever, but, we all came from someplace. And so many other people have been coming and have needed to come and are coming. And so we're in kind of a particularly crisis time now, really, with just trying to absorb and meet the needs of all these new neighbors. And there's just been kind of a terrible backlash from so many people who are not welcoming and say, go back to where you came from, even to people who were born in this country but look different. So I hope that we can find ways to a better future. And maybe that's what's happening with the Dane Sanctuary Coalition. And maybe we can learn more about how we can be part of the good that can happen. So.
Great, thank you. So let me give you a little bit of background. So my organization is Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice. We started really with the uprising in Madison in 2011 with Act 10 and the assault on workers' rights. And the faith community, as you all know, was very involved. I know FUMC was very involved with the protests, and the different faith communities. We each took a different night. The Jewish community had Monday night, and I think the Unitarians had Tuesday night, and I don't know, maybe you all had Wednesday night. I don't exactly remember. And we would hold vigils at the Capitol every night. At one point, we had 100 clergy marching into the Capitol chanting, "This is what democracy, this is what religion looks like." We wanted to really meet with the governor because he said he was a person of faith. His father was a pastor. And we wanted really to let him know that as faith leaders, we didn't think that what was happening in our state really reflected the values of the people of Wisconsin. So we ended up bringing about 28 clergy and faith leaders from all different faith traditions. Couldn't meet with the governor, didn't want to meet with us, but we met with some of his staff. We had the most Twilight Zone conversation you can imagine, as we just had such conflicting worldviews that just did not meet in the middle at all. But afterwards, a number of us stayed behind, and we decided that we really needed to raise the faith voice in this conversation. And so from there grew Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice. We have a wide economic and social justice agenda. We work on workers' rights, we work on safety net issues, hunger, homelessness. We work on voting rights, and we work on immigrant rights and immigrant justice. In November of 2016, there was what we thought of as a cataclysmic event happening. I think you can imagine November 2016, what that event was. We called together groups of our clergy, our activists, and had the conversation of what is our role as faith leaders in this new reality after what was a horrendous campaign season that was just filled with rhetoric that was full of hate, that was full of Islamophobia and misogyny and homophobia and anti-immigrant rhetoric. And what is our job as faith leaders to counter that messaging? And as we went around the room and I asked people just to sort of throw out, what are you most passionate about? What do you care most about? Where do you see the faith community most having an impact? We had invited Voces de la Frontera, an immigrant rights organization based in Milwaukee, but a statewide organization. We had asked if they could have somebody come and speak about what was happening with the immigrant community and how we could be good allies with that community that had been so targeted during the election. And as we went around the room and we came to Maria Garcia Serra from Voces, he said to us, well, the thing that the immigrant community most is looking for from the faith community is sanctuary. And this was something that had not been on our radar at all, that we didn't know a whole lot about. But you ask the question, you have to be willing to hear the answer, right? And you have to be willing to answer the call. So we started investigating and learning and finding out what it meant to be a sanctuary congregation and what it meant to form a sanctuary coalition. So the sanctuary movement really started in the 1980s. And it started along the border, and it started with civil wars that were happening most prominently in El Salvador and Guatemala. And immigrants refugees really were coming to the United States. 2 million refugees fled those South American countries. They went to Canada, they went to other places. About 1 million of them came to the United States. They came as refugees. They came because they were fleeing violence and unrest in their countries. But when they got to the United States, the Reagan administration decided to classify them as economic migrants. So they're not coming here fleeing violence and civil war. They're coming here looking for jobs. And so they don't qualify as refugees. They are just migrants. And as such, they were being deported and sent home basically to a death sentence. In Tucson, the Southwest Presbyterian Congregation said, this is unjust. And as faith leaders, we need to shine a light on what's happening. And so they really became the first sanctuary congregation and started what became known as the sanctuary movement. It very quickly spread across the United States. Still in 1982, it had already come to Milwaukee. Milwaukee became the 4th sanctuary city in the country. And by the time the sanctuary movement really had reached its peak, there were 400 sanctuary congregations around the country. So somebody asked, how can faith leaders make an impact? How can we make a difference? Are we helpless? And the answer is we absolutely can make a difference, and we're absolutely not helpless. But you have to take the long view. So it took about 10 years for that first iteration of the sanctuary movement to have a victory. But a victory they had. And it was through working through the court system and suing the federal government. And finally, in 1990, the court case ended up in what was called the ABC agreement. And hundreds of thousands of cases of people applying for refugee status were able to be relitigated. And so people who had been turned away before were able to have their cases opened up, and in many cases were able to achieve refugee status. So then the sanctuary movement kind of went dormant for a long time until 2016. But the issue of immigration did not go dormant. And people tend to think that this is an issue of the Trump administration, or this is Republican policy. The fact is that this has been going on actually since 1790. This country has never been open and welcoming toward immigrants, as much as we like to point to the Statue of Liberty and Emma Lazarus's poem and say, oh no, we're a country that welcomes immigrants. We've never welcomed immigrants. From the 1790s on to the Chinese Exclusionary Act, to the 1920s when quotas were put into place to keep, well, mostly to keep Jewish refugees from Eastern Europe out. So this has been an ongoing issue throughout our history. And refugees have, and immigrants have built this country. Not always willing immigrants. Sometimes they were kidnapped and brought here against their will and enslaved, but also to build our country. And we need to remember that as well. Under the Clinton administration, this was an issue. Under the Obama administration, and actually President Obama, in his first term in office, deported over 400,000 people, earning him the nickname of deporter in chief. So this is not a partisan issue. This is not a Republican versus a Democrat issue. This is our policy in the United States and has been all along. And immigrant rights activists will tell you, let's stop saying that our immigration system is broken. It is not broken. It functions exactly in the way it is intended to function. It is intended to deter immigration. And that's what these policies are all about. So what is the New Sanctuary Movement? The New Sanctuary Movement, which started in the mid 2000s, it has two purposes. So one purpose is hospitality, compassion, justice. It is to provide a safe space for somebody who is in imminent danger of deportation to be able to put a pause on their immigration proceedings so that they have due process. That is one of the things that they were seeing at the southern border in the 1980s, was that there was no due process. People were just being summarily deported back to their home countries or to any place. And actually we're seeing that today as well, as Haitian immigrants have been summarily deported back to Haiti, even though there's nothing for them to go back to but unbelievable poverty, violence, hunger. That country has fallen apart. Their economy has collapsed. There's nothing for these people to go back to, and they are summarily being deported back with no due process. So this is happening today. So part of our role as a sanctuary coalition is to provide that hospitality, that safe space, so that somebody could be able to go through their due process in their immigration proceedings. But the other aspect of it, and why the faith community and why we can have an impact and can make a difference, is that public political aspect to the sanctuary movement. So somebody approaches us and they have an immigration order against them, and they are afraid that they are going to be deported back to their home country, and they need a safe place while their proceedings go forth. When that happens, and when we decide to accept somebody into sanctuary, it is not hidden, it's not secret, it is very public. And the whole idea is to be very public, because we want to shine a light on the injustice of our immigration system. So we notify immigration, we notify ICE, we notify our local police, and we say, this person is here and they are entering sanctuary. And we hold a big press conference and make it as public as possible, so that person can tell their story and can talk about what it means for them to be deported. If they are the sole breadwinner for their family and they're being deported, means that there will be nobody to support their family. If they're the sole caregiver for their family and they're being deported, means that what's going to happen to my kids if I get deported? So it is a very public act that we do as people of faith, to say, our faith traditions tell us that it is incumbent upon us to welcome the stranger, to provide hospitality, and to look out for people who have less than we do. And so we are doing this public act of welcoming and sheltering and shining a light on our immigration system. So we started in the end of 2016 doing this work, and by July of 2017 had 3 sanctuary sites, which, just by a weird coincidence, each of our sanctuary sites happened to be a building that is shared by 2 congregations. So we have 6 congregations that are host congregations at these 3 host sites. In total, the Dane Sanctuary Coalition has 21 congregations. So those congregations that are not host sites are supporting congregations. And that's so important, because it is a huge effort to house somebody in sanctuary. And because we are making that political public statement that all these different faith communities, Christian and Jewish and Unitarian, we all together as faith communities believe in justice for our immigrant neighbors and our immigrant siblings. So we do not currently have somebody in sanctuary, but there is somebody in sanctuary in Milwaukee at Ascension Lutheran Church. And the reason that she's in Milwaukee is because they had approached us to see if we could welcome her into sanctuary here at one of our host sites. But we, at that time, were actually housing an asylum-seeking family. This was a family that had come to Madison. They were seeking asylum. They were trying to go through their legal process. And they came to Madison because they had a sponsor here. But they lost their sponsor and they were homeless. And it was a mom and a dad and 3 school-age kids. And Fabiola Hamden, who is Dane County's immigration rights specialist, called and said, I have this family. I'm putting them up in a hotel for a few days. We can't keep them in a hotel indefinitely. Can they come into one of your congregations? And Orchard Ridge and Madison Mennonite share a building. They are one of our host sites, and they said, yes, we will take this family in. It is a huge undertaking to have somebody in sanctuary. We usually don't take families. We usually take an individual. That's our guidelines call for taking an individual, but this family presented themselves and we couldn't let them be on the street with 3 school-age kids. So it takes a lot of volunteers to be on site, to be there in case they need anything, to help with food, to help with furnishings, to help with transportation, to make sure the kids got enrolled in school and were attending school, to get medical care for the father who had medical issues, to make sure their laundry got done, and to make sure that they felt welcome and that they felt that they had friends in the community. So we didn't have the capacity to take in this woman who needed sanctuary. So that's why she's in Milwaukee and she is still there. So the sanctuary movement has grown by leaps and bounds. As I said, in the 90s, there were about 400 sanctuary congregations around the country. Now there are about 1,500. There are sanctuary coalitions around the country. And in addition to our work with being ready and have everything in place to welcome somebody into sanctuary when the need arises, the other piece of the work that we do is advocacy. So right now we are particularly working around a pathway to citizenship as part of President Biden's Build Back Better agenda. We work under the leadership of Voces de la Frontera and Centro Hispano. So we really take our marching orders from them. We look to them for what is the pressing need, what is it that we need to be doing right now. And right now it's the pathway to citizenship. And it's so important for the faith voices to be raised, for people to hear that as a faith community, we recognize the enormous contributions that immigrants have brought to this country. We recognize the humanitarian need for people to have refuge in this country. And we recognize that this is a country that has always proclaimed itself as welcoming and open and the place of refuge and a haven. And we need to actually live up to the words that are on the Statue of Liberty that we have never really lived up to. So that advocacy piece is so important. So how can First United Methodist get involved, and what is some of the work that we do on a day-to-day basis? There are several things that we do to provide direct service for immigrants, for asylum seekers, for refugees, and then there is that public advocacy piece. So some of the things that we do in terms of direct service. So again, we are ready to accept somebody into sanctuary if and when that need arises. Actually, the immigration attorneys that we work with always are telling us it's a matter of when, not if. And we provide a service that the immigration attorneys are constantly telling us how grateful they are that they have this service to tap into. We have a volunteer driver program. So here in Wisconsin, up until 2007, it was legal for people to have driver's license regardless of their immigration status. In 2007, the law was changed, and if you are undocumented, you cannot get a legal driver's license in Wisconsin, so you cannot drive legally. This is a huge issue for the immigrant community. It means that every time they get behind the wheel of the car to go to work, to get to school, to get to a medical appointment, to get to the grocery store, they are putting themselves at risk. So one of the things that we advocate for is legal driver's license. So it's very difficult for undocumented people to drive. It's impossible to drive legally. And there's a huge need for drivers. And so we have this volunteer driver program, and we drive people either to Milwaukee for their ICE check-ins. The nearest ICE office is in Milwaukee, and people have to go to Milwaukee to check in with ICE to get fingerprinted, to check in and check in on their the status of their immigration proceedings, and just to tell ICE, yes, I'm still here. Yes, I'm still trying to find a legal way to stay in this country. They also need to be driven to Chicago because the nearest immigration court is in Chicago. And sometimes it was their attorney who was driving them, but for the attorney to drive them, it's a huge amount of time that the attorney takes to do that. And while they're driving, they can't be talking to their client and prepping them for court. So if we have a volunteer driver who can take them to court, then that frees up their attorney to spend the time prepping them and getting them ready for their case. And sometimes the attorney can't go with them, and so they really need somebody to drive them. But it's more than just driving them. So one of our volunteer drivers takes them and goes with them into their court proceedings so that they know that they're not alone. And this also is so important, accompanying. That is a big piece of what we do as a sanctuary coalition. So immigration attorneys around the country have told us how important accompaniment is. So somebody goes to the immigration hearing and they tell the judge, I'm a part of the community. I live in the community, I work in the community, maybe I have a business in the community, maybe I work for somebody in the community, I go to school or my kids go to school there. I am part and parcel of the fabric of this community. Well, if the judge looks around and there's nobody in the courtroom with them, then the judge may be a little bit skeptical about that claim. But if there are people sitting in the gallery, in the courtroom, particularly some people with color, that's always very helpful. Then that sends a message to the judge that this person actually does have the community behind them, and they actually do are people who are part of the community. And judges are human beings like everybody else, and they are swayed by what they see, just like everybody else. And across the country have seen how powerful this accompaniment can be and how it can be a factor in swaying a judge to find in favor of the immigrant and allow them to stay in the country. So that's a big piece of what we do, is this driving and accompaniment program. We also have very often gotten phone calls either from Fabiola from the immigration office or from one of our immigrant rights attorneys or from the Community Immigration Law Center. And they say, I have somebody who's leaving detention. They've been able to post bond and they're leaving detention in Dodge tomorrow, and they have no place to go. And so we scramble to find housing for this person. And that's happened several times. We have sometimes put somebody up in a hotel until they've been able to find more stable housing, or we found home hospitality for that person. We're looking right now into several different models around the country of different ways to have more infrastructure so that we're not scrambling at the last minute always to find housing for somebody who's leaving detention tomorrow, but that we have something already in place where we can house somebody. So sanctuary, housing people, driving and accompanying, these are things that we do all the time, that we're very engaged in, that are things that are very, very important. We also do a lot of educating. We do presentations like this. We have webinars with some of our immigration attorneys who will update us on the legal situation and the legislative situation, both in Wisconsin and on a federal level. We have a big read program. Last year we read The Death and Life of Aida Hernandez, which detailed the struggles of a young woman in California who was brought to California from Mexico as a child, and how she struggled through her different immigration proceedings and the things that happened to her in her life. Right now, we're reading a book called Separated: Inside an American Tragedy by Jacob Soberoff. He's an MSNBC reporter, and he found himself throughout the Trump administration reporting on the building of the wall and things that were happening at the border, and more started to learn about families being separated at the border and children being put into detention on their own, and started to be reporting on that situation. And so he wrote this book that really details the policy of separating families at the border and how that played out and what that meant for the families who were coming here seeking refuge and seeking asylum, only to be separated from their children, in some cases, very, very young children. And this is a policy that did not end with the Trump administration. People need to know that there are still kids who are in detention at the border who we've lost track of their families and have no idea where their parents are and can't reconnect them. And families are still being separated at the border as well. So people think, oh, well, you know, Trump is gone now, all the problems are solved. This is not the case at all. So a pathway to citizenship, it's so important. We have 11 million undocumented people in this country. Approximately 75,000 of them live here in Wisconsin. There are people still coming across the border, people coming from Haiti, people coming from South and Central America, and people coming from all over. Right now, the Afghani refugees are very much in the news and very much on people's minds. You talk to immigrant rights and resettlement agencies, and they constantly are saying, remind people, as important as that is, there are tons of other people who are already here, who came from other countries, who were struggling to resettle, who were struggling to find affordable housing for, who were struggling to find legal aid for, who were struggling to find jobs for. So this is, you know, something happens and there's something that comes in the news, and we all turn our attention to that, and we lose sight of the fact that this is ongoing work that has been going on for years and will continue to go on long after the last Afghani refugee has left Fort McCoy and the other bases around the country. One of the things that really came to light during COVID that people in the immigrant community knew about always, but now we're starting to be forced to pay attention to, is how much immigrants in this country fill essential jobs, and they're told you are an essential worker and you have to come to work and we need you so much and you're so important. And yet on the other hand, they are treated abominably and they are constantly at risk for being picked up and being deported. So you're an essential worker until we decide that we don't need you anymore, and then you're completely at risk. Undocumented workers have always been at risk in the workplace because of their immigration status, because they are so at risk for an employer deciding that they're unhappy with them for some reason and calling ICE, for a coworker deciding that they're unhappy with them and calling ICE. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, it is the government body that picks up undocumented and puts them in detention and starts deportation proceedings. So to be an undocumented worker, you are completely at risk for being vastly underpaid, for wage theft, for sexual harassment, just for being required to work overtime and not getting paid for those hours. And constantly in fear, constantly in fear. During COVID, when so many of us were able to go and work from home and learned about Zoom and how wonderful Zoom is and how it enabled us to work with our coworkers and go to meetings and do all kinds of things and still stay safe at home, farm workers, factory workers, food service workers, food industry workers, truckers, home healthcare workers, they did not have the luxury of working from home, and a large percentage of them are undocumented workers. And going to work under unsafe conditions during the pandemic and feeling like they had no recourse. Because if I complain that we're working in the factory, on the line, and we're working right next to each other and there's no social distancing, and my coworker is coughing and is clearly sick and is not being sent home because paid sick leave, what's that? That's not a thing that exists. So we're going to work and we're sick, and we know that we're sick, but we still have to go to work or we'll lose our job. And I can't complain, because if I complain, my boss is going to call ICE and I'm going to get picked up and be deported. So safety during COVID has been a huge issue, and has really raised our awareness of how at risk undocumented workers are, even before COVID, but now we are finding ourselves forced to pay attention to that. So pathway to citizenship. Under the Build Back Better agenda, there was a piece of that legislation that would allow for a pathway either to citizenship or at least to permanent resident status in this country. And it, for very complicated reasons that you've, I'm sure, been reading about and have some understanding of, the decision was to go through this process called reconciliation to be able to get this legislation passed with just a sheer majority, without having to have 60 votes in Congress, in the Senate. The Senate parliamentarian said that immigration piece of the legislation, that pathway to citizenship, didn't meet the criteria for falling into a reconciliation process. And so that piece was taken out. It has since been put back in by the Biden administration in a sort of a stripped down fashion, and they are hoping to get it passed. But it's very, very iffy and very, very unclear whether it will actually pass muster or not. If it did, it would be a pathway for DACA recipients, deferred action for childhood arrivals, people who were brought here as children and by their parents, and grew up here, went to school here, consider themselves American, feel like they're American, and yet technically they are not here legally. So DACA is a way for them to stay. They have to keep applying. It's extremely expensive. It's over $500 now per application. But it's not a pathway to citizenship. So part of the Build Back Better would give them within 3 years a pathway to citizenship. Other undocumented immigrants who can show that they've been here for 10 years and a number of other hoops that they have to go through, also in this bill would have a pathway at least to permanent resident status, if not actually to citizenship. Would be a longer process. It is always a possibility that that piece of the legislation again will be taken out. And this has been going on, again for years. In the mid-90s, there was a citizenship bill that we all had high hopes was going to pass, and then it didn't, and it got shelved. So this is something that is, always one step forward and 2 steps back in trying to get a way for these people who have lived here, in some cases for decades, who've built businesses, who are part of our essential economy, who are our neighbors and our friends and our schoolmates, for them to be able to find a way to stay here legally. This has just been an ongoing issue, and it just has come to the fore in people's consciousness because of COVID and because of the essential worker issue. So we need the advocacy. We need to educate people. We need to be writing letters to the editor. We need to be holding press conferences. We need to be holding rallies, and we've been doing these things. And this is something that First United Methodist can definitely be a part of. And again, we do this with in partnership with Voces de la Frontera, and they have been just working night and day, and standing in front of Tammy Baldwin's office and Ron Johnson's office, and trying to pressure our elected officials to do the right thing, and to stand up and support the immigrants that that are living among us and that are part and parcel of our society and our city. What's happening at Fort McCoy, what's happening with the Afghani refugees, I wish I knew. It's very complicated, as all of this is. Catholic Charities is working on site at Fort McCoy to work with the refugees. They are recruiting volunteers to come and help with things like with childcare, with literacy, with English lessons, all kinds of things. They have approached Wisconsin Council of Churches to help with that effort, and Wisconsin Council of Churches has asked us for our help in recruiting volunteers. At the same time, Jewish Social Services, which is the resettlement agency here in Madison that works on resettling refugees, and they work also with a volunteer organization called Open Doors for Refugees. They are preparing to welcome some of the Afghani refugees here into Madison. I hear over and over and over again from Wisconsin Council of Churches, from Jewish Social Services, from HIAS, which is a national immigration rights organization. They all say the exact same phrase. It's just the thing that everybody says now. We are flying the plane while we are building it, because this all happened so quickly, and there are so many people now on military bases around the country, and the military wants them gone yesterday, and so everybody is scrambling now to find ways to resettle these people. Most likely, more folks will go to Milwaukee than to Madison, because there's more affordable housing in Milwaukee, and Lutheran Social Services is the main resettlement agency in Milwaukee. Here, it's Jewish Social Services, and they are really pushing to rev up their capacity, trying to hire more people and have more in place, but housing is really the biggest issue. So one of the things that they're asking for, if anybody has a house that you're not using, an apartment that you're not using, if you have a room in your house that you can offer somebody home hospitality, they really are struggling to find housing for what they keep saying is still an unknown number of people who are coming. But we're mostly, there's some individuals, there are a lot of families, and some of them are large families. And this is a problem because our housing laws state that, depending on how many people are in the family and the genders of the people in the family, you need so many bedrooms. So one of the problems with the family that we were housing at Orchard Ridge, they had 3 kids. 2 of them were boys and 1 was a girl. So according to the housing rules, they needed to have a 3-bedroom apartment, 1 bedroom for the parents, 1 bedroom that the boys could share, but the girl, as the lone girl in the family, needed to have her own bedroom. That's by law. And so a 3-bedroom apartment in Madison that's affordable pretty much doesn't exist. So that's why it was really, really difficult to find housing for them. And that's what the Afghani refugees are coming up against now. They have a lot of, large families, lots of kids, or they're coming with, parents and grandparents, maybe aunts and uncles, different constellations of family units. And to find housing that have enough bedrooms that they can afford, that follows the law, and landlords that are willing to accept them with no credit and no rental history. The laws in Wisconsin have really been stacked against renters just in general. Much more favor the landlord than the tenant as a general rule. And then when you add in this added complication of they're being refugees or asylum seekers or undocumented immigrants or whoever it is that's looking for housing, it just becomes exponentially harder. So these are some of the many issues that are facing our immigrant community, our refugees, our asylum seekers. And those are all different categories, and they all each come with their own issues and their own complications. So it's a very big and complicated issue. So I'm going to stop talking because I'm sure I'm now totally confused you. So I want to give you all a chance to ask whatever questions you have.
Do they do some kind of background check when they're looking for a family? It looks like if you were a family willing to offer something, like my husband and I have a 3-bedroom, so we have 2 extra bedrooms, but we wouldn't, are there different rules if you are in a regular household than in some kind of apartment?
So if you're offering home hospitality, so what you would be doing is you would be offering to be a sponsor for a person. Now, if they're coming in as an asylum seeker, that's one kind of sponsorship, and you just fill out a piece of paper that says you're willing to sponsor this person. Some of the Afghan refugees are coming in under what's called humanitarian parole, and that's a whole different category and a different kind of sponsorship. And you have to fill out paperwork that says that you are going to sponsor this person, you're willing to help make sure the primary thing is that you are promising that this person will not become a public charge, meaning that they're not going to be looking for social safety net kinds of things. They're not going to be looking for subsidized housing, badger care, food stamps. A lot of these things, some of these folks aren't eligible for anyway, but you still have to promise that they're not going to be doing those things, looking for those kinds of supports. So you have to supply your last tax return and a paycheck stub to show that you yourself aren't a public charge and therefore can keep this other person who you're sponsoring. So that's a very specific thing for some Afghan refugees who are coming in under humanitarian parole. For asylum seekers who come through our borders, that's a different kind of sponsorship, but that's also a form to fill out. You are then told that the federal government, after you sign the thing saying you're going to promise all these things, the form also says the federal government can't hold you to it. It's very bizarre. As I said, our immigration system isn't broken. This is the way it's intended to work in very confusing and difficult ways. There is, if you want to volunteer at Fort McCoy and you're going to be working with kids, then you do have to go through a background check.
Other questions?
What exactly is permanent status versus citizenship?
So permanent residential status is not citizenship, but it means that you can't be deported. So you've got some kind of status and you're here legally. So you're no longer undocumented. You have documentation that says you're allowed to be here legally, but it's not a pathway to citizenship. So you don't get voting rights, things like that.
When you use the term pathway to citizenship, is there a clear list of instructions that if you follow these steps, you can get there?
No.
Okay.
So in the Build Back Better agenda, there is sort of laid out, what the steps are and what the qualifications are and who qualifies under which of the different kind of categories. That's if the bill passes. Right now, we hear so often, like, why don't these people just get in line, right? Why don't they just, get a visa and get in line and, do it like my great grandparents did, right? Well, first of all, our great grandparents probably didn't do it that way either. But there is no line to get into. We've had presentations by immigration rights attorneys, and how they keep this stuff in their head is amazing to me, because there's like at least 10 different kinds of visas. And they are all of them, each one has its own kind of category and very, very, very narrowly drawn requirements for who qualifies under that specific visa. And they all have quotas. So as I said, there's 11 million undocumented people in this country. If you got every visa filled for every quota, that would be maybe, I don't know, I'm bad at numbers, but like 100,000 people. It was a drop in the bucket of what the need is. And that's the people who are already here, much less people who are trying to get here. So there is no line and there is no clear path for how to get here and how to get either legal residence status or actual citizenship. And even having a green card is not a guarantee of anything. People have been deported who've had green cards. Until you have that thing that says you are either a permanent legal resident or actually have taken the oath and become a citizen, you're always going to be at risk.
I feel like Van and I have to get right across the stage quickly to get the next letter.
But it's nice to be heard. Is it true that in the collapse of the Twin Towers, possibly as many as 600 more people died because they were undocumented immigrants?
I'm sorry, I have absolutely no idea.
I don't know, I
never
heard that and I thought, I'm sure there were people working in there
Well, I'm sure there were.
that were not documented.
But I don't think that the first responders who tried to help people in 9/11 didn't bother to ask people's immigration status before they tried to get them
No,
out
I
of
understand
buildings.
that, but when you look at the roles of people there, those illegal workers probably aren't on the rolls. Correct?
I don't know that that's true. I'm sorry, I really can't comment. I don't know.
The question that we had about the farm laborers in California, what about, I don't want to use the term those people, but
Yeah, so our dairy industry could not exist without undocumented workers, literally. The Farmers Association isn't known as a bastion of liberal politics, but in this one case, they want their workers to be able to drive legally because how do they get to work? Not that the dairy industry treats its workers so beautifully or humanely or justly, but in this one thing, they do want their workers to be able to drive to work. So many of the industries in Wisconsin could not exist without the undocumented people who work in those industries, the dairy industry, the food industry, and I don't just mean working in restaurants, but all the way from the agriculture to the food processing to the delivery to the restaurant workers. At every step along that pathway of how we get our food, grocery store workers, undocumented workers are far and away in the majority of who are in those industries. We absolutely, we could not exist. We should be so grateful to those people who kept so much of our industries going during COVID, again, under really, really dangerous conditions.
You mentioned earlier that there were 4 sanctuary residences, sponsored or housed by 8 congregations.
3 sponsored by 6, but yes.
Oh, okay. All right. I presume they have to be residents or housed within the physical confines of a church in order to meet the traditional concept of sanctuary, right?
Yes.
The second part of the question is, why are there so few people in sanctuary? I would have thought that there'd be a scrambling demand for sanctuary given what's gone on with ICE in the last 10 years.
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. So how does sanctuary function? When somebody needs to go into sanctuary, first of all, it is a last resort. It is, I have a deportation order against me. I have a court date. I'm afraid I'm going to be just deported summarily without going through due process. This is my last hope, because going into sanctuary is a as much as we are warm and welcoming and try to make the space comfortable, it is a grueling thing to be in sanctuary. If a person goes into sanctuary, they are in that space 24/7. They cannot leave because ICE knows where they are, because again, we tell them where they are. And ICE literally will camp out in the church or synagogue or mosque or wherever they're in sanctuary in their parking lot and just wait. So they cannot leave. And so, you know, as warm and welcoming and wonderful as any place is, if you can't leave it, it is going to feel like a prison. So that's the first thing. So what does it mean to be in sanctuary, and why is this a thing that houses of worship engage in? So Department of Homeland Security, which is the overall government agency which houses ICE and Border Patrol and all those other immigration agencies. They have a memo, and it's just a memo, it's not the law, that says that they will not go into certain sensitive locations. And those sensitive locations, up until just a couple of months ago, those sensitive locations only included hospitals, schools, and houses of worship. So because houses of worship fell under that veneer of safety, it became a place where an undocumented immigrant could find safety. But again, only if they stay in the building. Actually, just about a month or 2 months ago, Homeland Security issued a new memo, which has greatly expanded the definition of sensitive locations and has said we don't want to have any deportation enforcement activities around any place where people go to search for essential services. So we are not going to go to homeless shelters. We're not going to go to domestic violence shelters. We're not going to go to food pantries. We're not going to go to medical offices. We're not going to go to schools. We're not going to go to, so there's a much broader list now of places where ICE, at least in theory, isn't supposed to go. But that was just like a month ago. Up until then, it was just these 3 locations. And when somebody would approach us to ask if they could go into sanctuary at one of our sites, they would go through a vetting process. First, we would assume that they would come to us from an attorney. So we would first have that reference, if you will, from the attorney. This is somebody that I know, is somebody of good character, is somebody who deserves to stay in this country, and somebody who really, really needs sanctuary. This is their last hope. We have certain guidelines. We have a 16-page document that's the guidelines for how the Sanctuary Coalition functions. And in those guidelines is a long list of requirements for the person entering sanctuary. Our congregations all are smoke-free. They're all alcohol-free, drug-free. So there are certain requirements. So the person has to agree to that. And as I said, we want this to be public, right? We have that political statement as well as the welcoming statement. And so the person entering sanctuary has to agree to allow their case to be public. We are not hiding, we are not harboring. To hide or harbor somebody and to frustrate the legal process is illegal. But to offer somebody hospitality and to be public and open about it, that is not illegal. That's not harboring. We're not hiding. And so again, the person who's asking for sanctuary has to be willing to agree that yes, that's okay with me to be public and for ICE to be notified that this is where I am. They have to agree to that. So a lot of people don't want to agree to those things. And a lot of people just don't want to go into sanctuary. As I said, we are only set up for an individual. We happened to bring that family in because it was a pressing need that was, presented to us as we need to house these folks. Ordinarily, we would only want to bring in one person, which means separating them from their families, which is the very thing they're trying to avoid by not being deported, right? So that also, again, if they're the main breadwinner or they're the main caregiver, to go into sanctuary means to take that support away from their family. So it is a very, very difficult decision for somebody to make to go into sanctuary. Right now, I believe there's about 49 people around the country who are in sanctuary. Some of them have been there for a long time. Some of them have been there for a couple of years. Some of them have only been there for months. But there are some people who've been living in, there's a woman living in a church in Denver. Actually, I think she may have gotten out recently, but she was there for like 3 years.
One more question with Helen and then we'll close up.
Well, in a way, you've answered some of my question by talking about sanctuary and all, but I'm just wondering, this is a mess. We're all sitting here. What can we do?
So again, advocacy is the most important thing right now. Raising the profile of this issue, educating people, having more events like this. There are some amazing immigrant rights folks in Madison who would love to come and talk to you. There's the Community Immigration Law Center, which is housed at Christ Presbyterian Church. There's the UW Immigration Law Center. There's Centro Hispano, Voces de la Frontera, Fabiola Hamden from the Dane County Immigration's office would love to come and tell you about the folks that she works with every day. So educate yourselves, educate your congregation, educate your families, write letters to the editor, come to rallies and to press conferences and to stand in front of Tammy Baldwin and Ron Johnson's offices. Join the Dane Sanctuary Coalition. We have a website. Check out our website. We have a Facebook page. I post to it regularly with updates, news updates, action alerts, event announcements, all kinds of things. So go and like our Facebook page and follow it and repost what you see on your social media so your friends will see that there's things going on. Whatever you all can do to raise this issue and to keep the pressure on Tammy Baldwin and Ron Johnson and Mark Pocan is so important. And our own legislature, which again took legal driver's licenses away from undocumented folks who live and work here, who are making our DACA recipients pay out of state tuition at our universities. Some of our different localities around the state are working with ICE under a program called 287G, which basically deputizes local law enforcement as ICE agents. So make sure that our local police department and sheriff's office are not doing that, that if they pick somebody up, this is one of the most prevalent ways that somebody will get picked up and put into detention is because they had a broken taillight or they failed to stop at a stop sign or they're driving without a legal driver's license. They get picked up and the police recognize that they are undocumented and they call ICE and they say, I have this person in custody. They're leaving tomorrow. You can come pick them up. Make sure that our local law enforcement aren't engaging in those kinds of activities. We have a new chief of police. We have a new sheriff. This is a great opportunity to call them up and introduce yourself and say, hi, I'm in the community and I have this issue that I'm wondering how you address it. So that kind of advocacy also is really important.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Bonnie. We're very grateful that you could be here today. And I will get a link to their website out to you guys. We're just going to follow up with Milton now with what's coming up in the coming weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We learned a lot. We've got a lot to do, haven't we? Just a reminder about the next few weeks. Next Sunday, I'm going to lead a discussion appropriate for Advent. We're going to be talking about Mary and Joseph and the ways they encourage us for our own personal Advent journey. So I hope that you'll be present for that. Then we're going to take 4 weeks break because the Sunday that follows is the annual church conference at this time. And the Sunday that follows that is the annual children's Christmas program at this time. And then the Sunday that follows that is the day after Christmas and then the day after New Year's. So we'll be back at this on the 9th of January. Our little planning committee is already hard at work and we already have ideas. When we come back in January, that'll be the start of our 3rd year. So I think we can't eat in this room. We can't have birthday cake, but we could have a candle, I suppose. So I really think it's been a good, pardon me. So anyway, does that kind of get the map out in front of us? So we're here 1 more week, then we have 4 weeks break, and then we'll be back at this. But when I think of the variety of things that we have learned and the discussions we've had, it's been a rich experience, and I hope you feel the same. And we do want to keep going. And so it's Rich in the corner that makes all this sound stuff possible. And Sarah doing what she did. And then Karen German, that is also a great help. So the 4 of us have had a good time trying to steer the thing, but we really appreciate all of your participation. So we'll see you here next week. Thank you.